I'm Ray Barry, and this is the Audio Wave Cafe podcast. On this episode, my guest is drummer Paul Hooper, who's played in bands as diverse as Indian Summer and Prelude. First, I'll talk about Ticketmaster's insidious dynamic ticket pricing. I'll also be shining a spotlight on pirate radio stations. In the 60s, they ruled the music airwaves in offshore ships. If you've never heard of them, check it out. Let's move on. Ticketmaster have been in the news a lot lately. John Oliver, an American TV host, a few months ago called it one of the most hated companies on earth. And he wasn't talking about the fees that are added to your concert tickets, which can be ridiculous. He was talking about dynamic ticket pricing. It's an algorithm-based system that alters the price of tickets based on supply and demand. It's been used in America for some time, and has recently been used here in the UK for tickets to see Harry Styles' Love on Tour shows at the Coventry Building Society Arena in May 2023. On Ticketmaster's website, it states, these tickets vary in price driven by demands from fans, similar to airline tickets and hotel rooms. And that statement is true. Dynamic pricing has been around for some time. I've secured airline tickets and hotel rooms at discounted rates, and I'm sure you have too. But there's no way you're going to get close to seeing Harry Styles, Bruce Springsteen or Adele for £7.50 a ticket. You'll be paying substantially more. I coughed up about £300 for 2 tickets to see Crowded House in New York a couple of months ago through Ticketmaster, who say they aborted dynamic ticket pricing to stop touts ripping off the general public. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy to think they were doing this for me and you. If you have found it really hard to secure tickets for your favourite artist show, it's likely that those tickets were snapped up by reseller sites. I've seen so many listed shows that were sold out in less than a minute of going on sale. These sites then typically hype up the prices of tickets to astronomical heights. I checked out SubHub, a reseller website where you can secure a ticket to see Adele in Las Vegas in November 2023. For a seat at the back of the auditorium at Caesars Palace, you'll need to part with almost £700. But if you want to see Adele up close and personal near the stage, it'll cost you almost £39,000. And you can't just buy one ticket, you need to buy at least 2. Freaking heck. Closer to home, one fan is looking for a refund after accidentally splurging out £697 for 2 tickets to see Harry Styles, after claiming the tickets were originally advertised for £155. Ouch. Stuart Galbraith, the CEO of Kilimanjaro Live, a music management and promotions company, stated that ticket prices are typically set by the artist, their management and the promoter. So was Ticketmaster just doing the artist's bidding? For me, there was a ray of sunlight. Crowded House cancelled the show we were going to. But by God, trying to get my money back from Ticketmaster, well, that's another story. It's with great pleasure I introduce my guest today. He is a much respected drummer, originally from Coventry, Paul Hooper. Paul, many thanks for joining me on this call.
Well, many thanks for having me join you. Not often these days I get asked to talk about my career, as long as it's been.
Where do you live now?
I live in a little village on the northeast coast of Northumberland, and I've been here for over 30 years now, believe it or not. I mean, I don't know where the time went, but I keep thinking I'm still a new guy in town. But I've been here for 30 years, believe it or not.
Good grief. I've a feeling there's not many music shops up that way.
Well, actually, I don't even go into Newcastle. There's a big drum shop in a place called Washington, which is south of the Tyne, between Gateshead and Sunderland. And it's got a really good drum shop there, actually, on an industrial estate. But it's a big place, and to do... You know, they get orders from all over the country, actually.
Right. Paul, how long have you been playing drums?
All my life, really. I first realised I'd got a talent for it when I passed my 11 plus, because I was raised in the Persian Gulf. My dad got a job in Bahrain working for the Caltex Oil Company, American company. And when I passed my 11 plus, it meant I had to come home to Britain to a boarding school for a few years. They had a hobbies room there in the top floor of the school, and there was a drum kit, and it was basically a load of sixth formers had formed a band, much in the sort of like the Shadows. The Shadows were all the rage then. The Shadows and the Ventures. That's what bands were about. And anyway, I used to sit in with them, and I could play along without really any problems. And then I found that all my mates of my age couldn't. So straight away, that gave me a little bit of cachet. You know, everyone was like, "Oh yeah." And I remember one of the sixth formers being particularly impressed and going, "Hey, you keep it up. You kind of got a talent for that." And he showed me a few things and gave me some advice. And so that was it. From that moment on, that's kind of always what I knew I would want to be doing in one form or another.
Okay, what was the motivation behind getting into playing music in a band then?
First of all, I enjoyed it, and it's a weird thing. You when you're playing along with other people and making music, something happens. It's like there's a bond that goes on, and it's just pure enjoyment. And they're just hearing other things, and like hearing, you know, I started off listening to people like the Everly Brothers and the Shadows. Then the kind of the Beatles came along, and all that stuff was really motivational. And I think that the Beatles, for instance, spawned thousands of bands. If people could see the fame and the fortune and the whole thing is all wrapped up in it. But basically, playing with friends, just making music with friends, it kept me out of mischief. So that's for sure, because that's all I kind of concentrated on.
I know it kept me out of mischief.
Yeah, well, it does, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know what I would have been doing in my spare time or any time if I wasn't doing that. And the fact that I managed to earn a living up until very recently, all my life, without ever having, you know, I had a proper job for 2 or 3 years, but the rest of the time I've earned a living from it. So I've been very lucky, you know. I think I've had a charmed life. I think at the time it was pretty much me and Bob Jackson that we were sort of came out as we were school friends really from that age. We were dedicated to it, and I think that was the difference. We sacrificed quite a lot to get to where we got in terms of getting our first record deal. We did put a lot into it, and it meant that we did without a lot of things, you know. I wasn't spending money on sort of, you know, anything but just music. Either it was buying records to inspire me or buying equipment. I remember when we formed our first proper band, you know, Bob walked everywhere. And as he was my friend, I had to walk with him rather than get the bus to save money to put a deposit down on a Hammond organ, you know. And that was what I mean by dedication. And we did succeed, you know. We got a record deal and made a record. All right, it didn't sell very well, but we did what we set out to do and left the rest to how we thought it would work. Left the rest to the record company to promote it and all the rest of it. Well, that side didn't kind of work out. But we were prepared to do anything. We would work whenever we could, doing the gigs, and performing wherever we could. You know.
You're talking about progressive rock band Indian Summer, which you helped form in 1969. Do you have any standout memories from that period?
Well, number one, it was, as I say, it was an exciting period because we slowly built that thing up. When we first got together, we were doing covers basically. We weren't writing that much. We were doing covers, but we were doing kind of different covers that ranged from Frank Zappa through. Yeah, I mean, we were doing Frank Zappa stuff off his first album, which most people were like shunning and think what? But we were doing Frank Zappa. We were doing Hendrix. If 6 was 9 was one of the numbers. We were doing some Arthur Brown songs, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, who literally you know, we went down to a thing. Me and Bob went down to a thing called the 14-hour Technicolor Dream, held at Ali Pali in London, and it was the first happening, psychedelic hippie happening in the country, and it was quite an amazing event. And if you look it up now, it's a landmark event whereby Pink Floyd were there. First time I ever saw Pink Floyd, and it was might even just before they released their first album. You're talking about '67, and John Lennon was walking about. Yoko Ono was there. Well, you didn't see them together, and it was the start of the whole psychedelic hippie thing. And the one act that we were both really impressed with, more than any, I think, was The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Now, Arthur Brown had a very, very distinctive voice, which ranged from baritone, very, I got a spell on you, to the high-pitched screaming thing. Well, Bob was quite taken with that. And if you listen to the Indian Summer album, you'll hear Bob doing some of that.
Right. Within a year of that album being released, Indian Summer folded. What happened there?
Well, I've got a lot of theories as to what happened. It's just my theories, but based on quite strong evidence, I suppose, which you didn't realise at the time. We were very young. We were kind of naive. We were happy that anyone was taking an interest in us, and the guy that took an interest in us was a guy called Jim Simpson, based in Birmingham, and he had a thing called Big Bear Records. He was a big guy himself. That's why that was his nickname, the Big Bear. He'd signed a band for management called Earth, who we used to play the same venues in and around Birmingham. One particular inner city pub, wish I could remember its name, but it was quite a regular gig for us and them, and they used to sometimes use our equipment. We kind of had we're liking for each other, Their music was a lot more fundamental than ours, we thought. But they suddenly changed their name to Black Sabbath, and then they made an album which took off. Within a year, we were with the same team, a guy called Olaf Wiper, who was for Black Sabbath. He was with Philips, and they put together a label called Vertigo, and this label was aimed at what they call the underground scene at the time, the progressive rock scene. Every label was trying to get in on the very this alternative stuff going on, because could see it was selling, and sure enough that they did well out of that. But that same guy moved to RCA, and they said, we're going to make a label. We called it Neon. So we got signed to Neon through Olaf Wiper, using the same producer as produced the Black Sabbath's first album, Roger Bain, and with the same management, this Jim Simpson. So we thought, that's obviously the formula that works. We'll go with this. So we signed up to that, having also at the same time been offered a deal by Chrysalis Records. We should have taken, but we turned down, because we'd been by this time with Jim for a good year, and we thought, well, we're not going to be unethical here. Jim's shown interest in us. He's got us this deal if we want it. So we signed this contract, which, when I think about it, wasn't really with the record company. It was with Jim Simpson, who just was an intermediate between us and the record company as a production company. So we signed to his production company. He then gave the goods to RCA, and I think it was a one-off deal that RCA could pick up. If the thing had been successful, they'd have then gone back to Jim and said, can you give us another one now? But Jim would have got an advance of some sort, I think, from RCA. He would have done it for nothing, of which we never saw anything. And when the album was released finally, they advertised it. This is where I think it went a bit wrong. They advertised it as a label for students. Well, you tell students this is for them, and they run a mile.
It's true.
They won't be told. So all the stuff that ever came out on Neon flopped. It didn't last very long as a label. I think there's only about 6 releases on it, and it just caved. We got good reviews, but the album itself didn't sell. By this time, we were getting disillusioned. We did a tour of Switzerland, came back, divvied the money up, which was a pittance really, And at that point, I remember Colin Williams, the guitarist, said, "Look, I can't make a living at this. I got an offer of a job working at one of the car factories in Coventry." He said, "I'm going to take that." I think he might have had a mortgage by then, or anyway, he needed to, he needed income. Meanwhile, Malcolm Harker, the bass player, had already said he couldn't really stay with the band any longer because he had committed himself to running his father's firm up in Middlesbrough. But he told us that from the moment he joined, that there was he could do it for a couple of years, but after that he was gone. I think he'd gone just after we finished making the album, when I think about it, because we got Wes Price in from the Sorrows. He became the bass player. I'll always remember a funny thing with Wes. We were down in South Wales, I think, in the middle of the night, couldn't find any digs. We'd done a gig and we were just sitting in the van, him and I at the front of the van, early hours of the morning. He was too tired and he said, "I'm nearly 27," because he was a bit older. She was, "I can't do this rock and roll thing much longer." You know?
In 1975, you were in a band called Zips. I believe the band was put together to promote a single, the Everly Brothers' Bye Bye Love. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I remember this. Well, I don't know if the band was put together to promote that single. I don't actually know why the band was put together, because the single, when it was put together, that single hadn't been recorded. It was Roger Lomas and Pip Witcher. I knew them. They were, they'd been in bands. They were in the Sorrows together, and they'd been doing things. I think they were in a band called Eggy. They'd been doing things for quite some time together with different people. They must have asked me, we're doing this thing. Would you want to be a part of it? And I said, and it was Mickey Most that was behind it. So I said, yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it was just another, well, yeah, let's do this, see what happens. And Mickey Most at the time was having big hits with Mud, amongst others. And Mud's template was to take an old song, like Oh Boy, and basically they slowed it up and piled lots of harmonies on, and so it was Bye Bye Love that decided we'd do the same treatment with that. And I remember going to Mickey Most's place and him looking at us and saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do with you, but you need to go down Carnaby Street and get yourself all geared up."
You're too scruffy.
He basically said, "I'm going to do a Mud with you." Basically said that. "I did it for Mud, I'll do it for you guys." So we went in and recorded this song. I think we recorded it at the Pie Studios. Yeah, it came out. And we followed it up with a Beach Boys thing that called You're So Good To Me, given the same treatment. At the same time, there was a band called the Dodgers, formed in London, which Bob was joining, along with a guy called Tommy Evans, who was the singer and bass player with Badfinger, and a guy called John Wilson, who was sort of fronting it. I don't remember how, but Tommy Evans was also part of this Zips thing in a way. And he said, "Well, I'm going to see which way it goes, because I might join the Zips thing and I might be with the Dodgers." They were both things that he was being offered at the time. And he was waiting to see which one, showed any signs of having some momentum, if you like. In the end, it was the Zips thing didn't come to anything, because them singles didn't sell. They were played on the radio, but they didn't sell. So that was the end of the Zips thing. But meanwhile, I was then asked by Bob, did I want to join this band called the Dodgers? And I thought, well, hold on a minute, you've got this John Wilson. I'd listened to his songs and I thought they're really good. I knew Bob could write and sing, and Tommy Evans didn't have to prove anything to me, because he'd been in a hit band with Badfinger and written, some really good songs as well. I thought, well, this is a really good lineup. I'd be stupid not to go with this. So I did. And if any band that was ever in had all the potential and everything going for it in terms of ticking all the boxes, it was the Dodgers,
Well, I've seen some of your YouTube videos of the Dodgers, and it is a very commercial, at the time, very commercial sound.
Well, I think that was its failing in terms of success, because you're talking about 1976, the start of the punk thing and the new wave thing, and we weren't that. But we made a nice album, and we made a second album which never came out.
You then went on to join Smacky. Now, that was a show band, I believe. Why did you do that?
Well, what happened was when the Dodgers folded, I was pretty upset about that because I said I thought it had the potential to be, to be really become something, and I still do if we'd managed to stay together. But the management, they lost faith quicker than we lost faith, and they pulled the plug on everything. It just made it impossible for us to carry on. We spent more time in the last year going to accountants meetings and management meetings. The word got out that I wasn't doing anything, because it was only a few months later that I got a call from Mick Smitham, who was the guitarist in Smacky, saying that the drum position was vacant. And I just thought, well, I've got no income at the moment, didn't want to go on the dole. The Dodgers thing had just dried up. And I thought, well, I'll do this till Christmas. It'll get me by. But once I joined, I realised how much work they were doing. I also realised there was potential to really play some interesting stuff, covers or not. And I got really involved in it quite early, and we started to put this show together that was a bit different from what a lot of bands were doing on that circuit. We were doing Manhattan Transfer stuff and Tube stuff, and even a cover of Weather Report's Birdland. And I realised you had to have your chops together to play this stuff, and it got more and more theatrical. And we started winning awards of Best Show Band of the Year from the Daily Mail and things like that, and the work kept piling in. And in the end, I couldn't just walk away from it, even if I wanted to, because by this time I'd got a mortgage, and I thought, well, actually, this is working out all right. By this time, I was, 30, approaching 30 or 30-ish, and I thought, forget shooting for the stars anymore, because you can't. There's got to be a point where you just. And I thought this job could be a regular thing, Watch bands form and break up. That carried on. And it was only really happens that after a few years in Smacky, me and Mick got headhunted by the Fortunes, that were also based in, Rod, the lead singer, was based in Coventry. And although musically it wasn't as challenging, financially it was a bit more rewarding, and the gigs were not substantially better, but certainly took us around the world, and more theatre type work, and rather than clubland.
Well, you spent 25 years in that band.
Yeah, I did, because again, once I was in that situation, it was regular work, it was good work. I got to travel all around the world, as I say, Far East, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, all over Europe, even South Africa. Went all over with the Fortunes. If they'd asked me 2 or 3 years earlier, I wouldn't have joined them. Before I joined them, I went to see the show, and they were doing comedy as well, because there was an era in the 70s where a lot of bands were on that chicken in the basket circuit. What they would do to get the work was they'd become comedy bands as well as music bands, so that the clubs would go, oh, we get a comedian, we get the comedy and the music in the same package. So that's where the Black Abbots came from, with Russ Abbott, There are a lot of bands like that. The Rockin' Berries turned to all comedy, more or less. I wouldn't have wanted to do that. That was just one of the ways of making sure the work kept coming in. But by the time I joined, they dropped the comedy, thank goodness. I didn't think they were very funny anyway.
They weren't funny.
Well, the little bits that they still... I could tell from the little bits that they still did, with the odd one-liners between songs. And I thought, yeah, I'm glad I wasn't with you when you were a full-blown comedy act,
Right. You've played many styles then. If you were alone at night with your drum kit, what genre would you prefer to play?
That's a good question. The bands that I really like are mainly American bands, like Little Feat. You know much about them, Little Feat?
Briefly, I remember Little Feat. In the 70s, weren't they?
Yeah, well, they're still going now, but they established themselves in the 70s. Little Feat, Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, anything that's slightly blues based with rhythm and syncopation going on. I like that New Orleans syncopation stuff. So I wouldn't want to be playing out and out full sort of fusion jazz, because you've got to be really, really good to play that stuff. I've done it, but you've got to be. But with bands like Little Feat, the rhythms are great. I can just about do them. Having said that, they're a great feel band, I like drummers like Jim Keltner. Have you heard of him?
I have.
Yeah, and obviously Steve Gadd. Yeah. People like that. Russ Kunkel, used to play with James Taylor, well, still does. So that's the stuff I like to play. And with the current band that I'm with, I'm doing a little bit of that. That kind of thing. That's stuff I like to play. I'm not really. I mean, the Fortunes was basically quality pop, but there wasn't a lot of scope for playing really kind of nice rhythms. It was fairly straightforward, four to the bar. But I like to think that I contributed to what we did, because I brought a lot of material to the Fortunes, made a lot of suggestions, many of which were taken up, and I was able to put little elements in, which I think helped us get a pretty sophisticated set for a band out of that 60s sort of thing,
Yeah, I get that. In 2011, you decided to retire from drumming. Why was that?
Well, it wasn't so much I wanted to retire from drumming. It was a convergence of a lot of things happening at the same time. First of all, we'd lost Rod Allen, the original singer with the Fortunes, to cancer a couple of years earlier, and suddenly there wasn't any originals in the band anymore, and I always felt a bit at odds with that. Artistically, the band wasn't fulfilling what I wanted either. That and the travelling I was getting a bit sick of. Financially, we'd taken a bit of a hit, because after Rod went, the work did drop down for a couple of years, and I was struggling. I thought, this is not really paying its way anymore. Added to that, I'd started this video thing, which I wanted to concentrate more on, and I'd even done a few video shoots of a weekend and said to Rod, look, I'm sorry, would you mind getting a debt for this weekend, because I got this video job, which quite frankly pays me a hell of a lot more. And at the time I thought, I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but he agreed to that while he was still alive. He agreed to that, and I thought, well, if I can do this, that might be a good transition period. But anyway, the point came where I'd say financially I was struggling. It wasn't paying its way, and I tried to fix that. And to me, there was a way of fixing it that I'm by my calculation, but I just couldn't get it sorted. And despite like 25 years of commitment, in the end it didn't count to me. It didn't count for very much. That. All these things put together. Plus, I wanted to spend more time at home, and I just thought, right, I've kind of, maybe this is a good time to move on. I was quite encouraged with the amount of work I started to get with the video thing, which would have probably gone on to be successful had I not shortly after had some health issues. I had a heart problem, and looking around these big cameras, and I thought, I shouldn't be doing this. So I kind of let that slide as well.
But you decided to get back into drumming, lugging around drum kits, because you're currently in two bands.
Yeah.
You're in West Coast Band and Prelude.
Yeah.
That's some balancing act.
Well, that was because of the video thing. I knew this woman she was sort of on the business side of things. She was someone I went in to try and get a bit of a grant for my video business. So she knew I had this little video business thing, and she rang me up shortly after and said, would I mind going along to this venue to film a band called Prelude that I remember from the 70s, and I didn't know they were based in the Northeast, because they were reforming, and she wanted some promo material. So I went along and filmed them. We just got chatting, and they said, we're doing an album. We're making an album. Would you mind playing on it, putting some percussion on it, is what they said. And I went, yeah, by all means. So I went along and added to the album, ended up playing drum kit most of the time. Then they said, they got gigs coming in. Would I be prepared to go along and play on the gigs? The gigs just kept piling up. All right, they're mainly local. They're all within about 50 miles radius. But you're right. I bought a brand new drum kit in order to do all this, a really expensive one, and I'm lugging it about. But in a way, going back to my health issues, if I can do that, I think that keeps me healthier.
I'd offer to be your roadie, but you're too far away, thank God.
Yeah, I know.
Paul, I think this is a good moment for us to wrap up this interview. It's been a real pleasure having you as my guest. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you. And all the best for any more podcasts that you do.
Thank you very much. That's great. On Saturday, 15th of July 1967, I was listening to the final broadcast from Radio London, hosted by Tony Blackburn. He was broadcasting from a pirate radio station, a former World War II US Navy minesweeper, anchored 3.5 miles off the Essex coast in the North Sea, just outside territorial waters and out of reach of the law. But by September 1967, the British government killed off all the pirate radio stations with the introduction of the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act. The first pirate radio station to broadcast off the English coast and safely in international waters was Radio Caroline, which incidentally survived the 1967 cull of pirate radio stations. The owner, Ronan O'Reilly, a music manager and nightclub owner, was frustrated with the stranglehold that record companies had on BBC Radio, which played what record companies chose. Back in those days, I also listened to Radio Luxembourg and a few radio shows, like Pick of the Pops, which only played the top 20. Over at the BBC, they couldn't understand why the music-listening public were dissatisfied with its popular music output. The mere thought of having a dedicated radio station playing music young people wanted to listen to baffled the BBC. Its chairman, Lord Normanbrook, even said, "You can't have popular music all the time. It'd be like having the pubs open all day." The government and eventually the BBC realised that they had to replace pirate radio with a radio station developed on similar lines as the pirates. And so on Saturday, 30th of September 1967, Tony Blackburn, ex-pirate, now buffed up with neat hair, jacket, shirt and tie, kicked off the first show on Radio 1 with Flowers in the Rain by Brummie band The Move. After offshore pirate radio stations faded away, it wasn't until the 1980s and into the 90s that pirate radio stations reappeared in the UK. Now it was black communities that felt the BBC wasn't catering to their music taste, especially in London, where many radio stations sprang up like Dread Broadcasting Corporation and Kiss FM. These stations played music others ignored like jungle, hip-hop and dancehall reggae. The pirates broadcast their shows from tower blocks, and the Department of Trade and Industry tried as they might to shut them down, but others just sprang up in their place. Today there are just a few pirate radio stations still transmitting, still putting out music their audience wants to hear. So what started out as a raised middle finger from Ronan O'Reilly of Radio Caroline to the government and BBC Radio became a cultural phenomenon, and many artists and bands thanked their lucky stars for pirate radio stations, which played their music from pop to acid house, from rock to UK soul, and greatly contributed to their success, and the listening public now had more music genres to choose from. Though long gone, those pirate stations and DJs cemented their place in the UK's music and cultural history. Coming up is a track by Prelude with Brian Hume on guitar, Irene Hume vocals, Paul Hooper drums, Ian Vardy guitar and Keith Tulip bass, taken from their CD The Bellevue Sessions and recorded at Broadwater Studios Gateshead. I Don't Want to Lose This Feeling.
We get caught up in the shine. I don't need to stretch the meaning, try to make it fine. There are other people moving in between our lines, and it surely goes without saying, it's all about our lives. I don't want to lose this feeling, I don't want to win, but if I lose this feeling, still don't want to win. There are other lovers leaving in between our lives, and it surely goes without saying, they get caught up in our lives.
That was I Don't Want to Lose This Feeling by Prelude. Thanks again to my guest Paul Hooper. On the next episode, my guest will be sax player and author John Barrow of ex-80s band The Swinging Laurels. We'll also be talking about a new code of conduct coming out in 2023, aiming to eliminate racism in music, and also shine a spotlight on American 60s pop star Del Shannon and his Coventry connection. I think that's about it. Yeah, it is. I'm done. Till next time.